Hello, everybody. We are here again at SOA Academy number 7, and this time joined with me is Andreas from Tomorrow. It's a pleasure to meet you. Your studio's work been featured on the blog several times, getting best of weeks. Really great works that been shared on the blog. And please, if you can tell the viewers now a little bit about yourself, how you got started with this business.
Well, as I said in part of my presentation, it was not a natural thing to start with. We always did drawings or graphic design and VFX work, so I've been always very interested in that kind of things. But I think just as for architectural visualization, that was kind of a coincidence that we got into that, because from my hometown, there are not too much VFX studios and that kind of things. Actually, I wanted to become a concept designer in Hollywood to start with, but I guess my dreams of Hollywood never happened. Maybe in the future, who knows? So we started up together with my two friends, Ragnar and Matthias, back in it's like 2014, 2004. Yeah, exactly. So we just mastered all the tools and everything, but at that time there was the only industry that actually was big in our city. We come from Gothenburg. It was the automotive industry. They were doing a lot of CG renderings at that time. But except that, to make a living out of your passion, it was kind of really hard. So we had to sit down and think, where can we start to get clients and money? And I think by that time, it was like the first generation of CGI companies had been around for a couple of years, but they were doing a lot of marketing stuff for residentials and just pure marketing. So, but the architects by that time, they were still doing a lot of hand sketches and drawings. So they were kind of skeptical to begin with. Why should they use the digital tools? So
on your website, at the About section, you write that you do not create images, you create change. That was really interesting to read. I mean, you focus on telling the story, but tell me, how do you create change with your work, with the images that you make? And I know you do a lot of competition work, and those projects win first prizes, but if you can kind of like distill that concept about creating change.
I mean, it's a very bold statement, of course, to create change, and but that is something that is the purpose why what we do. I mean, we're not making images these days. As my lectures here have been about, is we're very much a part of the design process, and by making change, I mean, it's really important to understand. I mean, why I go to work every day, what we are doing at our studio. Because, I mean, we're part of something greater. I mean, it's always team-driven. For example, I mean, I usually say like this. I mean, in a project, there is at least 5 people involved at minimum. I mean, it's we as the manager or we as a studio. Then it's like a 2D or a 3D artist. But then it's always the architect and the architect's client. And in the end, it's also the community, I mean, where we are working. So, I mean, we have to be very conscious and very aware of that the things we do, how we portray them, and the kind of programming we do. Because, I mean, these days we are programming the pictures. We spend more time with the entourage in our pictures than actually playing with the parameters and the modeling. So everything we put in the pictures is very carefully placed and crafted, because it will, when people look at it, they will recognize some patterns, and that's the thing that they will either like or hate about our picture and in the end our client's proposal. So creating change is be very aware of what is happening and how we can work with it. Maybe, I don't know if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense, but do you have some kind of structured process to this? I mean, when you talk about designing or being very conscious about where you place people in an image, animals in an image, cars, things like that, daytime, seasons. Do you have some kind of structural process to this, which is based on the project and the location, or is it more kind of like, feeling kind of an approach?
That's a really good question. Actually, the simple answer is based on reality and references. I mean, I think that's the most common mistake that all people I see. I mean, I see a lot of images, I see a lot of portfolio work, we make a lot of reviews, and we always have like internal discussions about imagery, because that's a really important part. But as soon as people start to work and make something from the back of their head, from their imagination, there is where things start to go wrong. And I mean, every time in our office, in our studio, for our internal discussions, every time we give criticize internally, constructive criticism, is when people don't have any reference. So I'm asking, okay, why does it look like that? And can you explain, how did you think? And sometimes you say, yeah, I think it felt good, or that is how I think it is. So my next question is always, are you sure? Why did you choose to do like that? Do you have a reference? And all the time when things have gone wrong, they don't have a reference. So I mean, but not only to preach about using references, I think it's the most important part is to understand what is a good reference. As for me, for example, I mean, I've been doing images for over 20 years, getting money out of making images, and I use reference in my daily life also. But the references don't necessarily have to be like a beautiful photo from a professional photographer. I mean, sometimes it can be like a really sloppy iPhone snapshot or something, just something that I want to remember, or just the information is the important part. I mean, for example, we always use in the studio. I always ask my artist, okay, do you know how far between in the street line, how far is it between the planted trees? What is happening in between? And all the things we take for granted. I mean, it's so easy to walk around here and we see a lot of hard work that people put into designing the space, but we never stop. And it's important to start thinking and reflect, why does things the functions and why it looks the way it does. So I think that is what is important to us today. I mean, it's all about design, because someone or a lot of different people have been putting a lot of heart and thought and a lot of hours into making something working. And we have to understand that part, or how else can we make images that portray the reality?
That's great insight. Can you tell me a little bit more about the competition work that you do? How much competition versus standard work do you do, and what is it with competition work that leverages the skills of the studio, if at all?
I would say today, as for competition work, I think it's about 10% of the work we do. I mean, we kind of choose to do like this because, I mean, of course, competition is what put us in the spotlight out there and make us work with like the interesting projects and with the interesting clients, because then they don't have as much limitations, because they don't have a real client. They can use more their imagination, and it's more about creating the future. So that is what I think. I think the competition part is a lot more creative, and that is why I am personally like attracted to that part. But also, I mean, if we were only to do like 100% competitions, it would be, I would be living on bread and butter or on water almost, because I mean it's the economics related to the amount of hours you put into that work. It wouldn't be able to run a company by that. But it's also very important as for a branding perspective, and I also think that it's good for the competition work we do at my studio. We try to rotate between different persons and different teams, because so everybody have the chance to do some competitions, because that kind of because of the short deadlines and the ever-changing design process. I mean, we can get a new model that has to be updated, and the client has some new thoughts they want to incorporate into the design. Then you really have to be on top, because then it demands a lot more from you as artists. You have to plan your work much more carefully. You have to be more structured and more flexible, but also be really good at communicating. Because I mean, how much extra time will this change do to my work? And you have to be able to communicate that in a good way and explain why, what to do and what not. So it's a lot about learning to directing the process and not be a slave to the client, but be on top rather.
Okay, thank you. So, final question I usually ask: if someone would want to work at your studio, what would be like the 3 things he should really focus on when he approaches to capture your attention?
First off, you should be a really nice person, because I mean, at our studio, we have a very unique pipeline we develop ourselves, and how we work with the tools, the workaround, and all the hacks. Because I mean, when we started, I mean, we had to invent all the techniques. There were no forums, no blogs, nothing, nowhere to learn from. You just had to think yourself. So I mean, first, I can teach someone to be a good artist, but not to be a good person. So I mean, that's number 1, of course. But number 2, I just think it takes 2 skills. I mean, it's being a curious person. You have to have an open mindset, and you have to really be eager to learn what is happening around you and want to absorb all kinds of information. So I mean, from that, I think you can. That's the foundation of being an amazing artist, actually.
Thank you very much, Andreas, and we'll see you in the next interview.